Hi everyone, David here. Another video for Advanced Squad Leader Starter Kit, and today I thought I'd just carry on with what I was doing. Now I'm going to talk about fire attacks. Specifically, I'm going to talk about a few cases of basically the who, what, where, when, why, and how to do the fire attacks. And as I do this, the reason I'm doing it is for some people who first get into the ASL Starter Kit. This is Starter Kit number 1's rule book. It's about 12 pages long, I believe. Yeah, with a lot of examples. This whole page is nothing but examples. So in actuality, it's about 9, maybe 8 pages long. That said, I'm going to talk about fire attacks, because even though in Rule 3.2 and on, it does talk about fire attacks. But I want to try to simplify it instead of trying to go through all the verbiage there. So first of all, I'm going to talk about who can conduct a fire attack. Refer to the screen that we got here. I will zoom in a little bit there. There, we can see our people. So on the left here, right there, we have all the Germans. We have a 436 green squad, conscript, a 467, excuse me, first line squad, another 467 first line with an 8-1 leader. On the other side over here are the Americans, a first line squad, a green half squad, and an elite full squad as well. So basically, who can shoot? Anybody, any unit can fire, so long as it's unbroken. That includes if the unit is pinned as such. Now, if a unit is pinned, its firepower is halved, but that's fine. It can still fire. So anybody who's not broken. So if, for example, this unit here were to be broken, it would not be able to fire at all, or ever, for that matter. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to make sure that he's not broken. And this guy will not be pinned either. Who do they shoot at? Well, they can shoot at anybody. I just made a note here. I want to make sure I get it. Include units. Right, so anybody who is in line of sight they can shoot at and in range. And remember, line of sight is true line of sight in ASL, whether you're talking about starter kit or full. As a reminder, any rule you learn in starter kit doesn't change when you go to the full. They just add more stuff to it. All right. There's a couple of exceptions, but not to worry. Oh, for those of you who are not Canadian and wondering what this is a poppy. Starting with the Friday, a couple of Fridays before Remembrance Day, which is for us on the 11th of November, we wear these to honor the war dead. Not those who were serving, this is to remember war dead. So it's very similar to Memorial Day in the United States. Okay, so now we know who can shoot. Unbroken units, including pinned units. What they shoot at are enemy units in line of sight. So, looking at this, for example, this conscript does not have line of sight to that first line squad, and I will confirm it for you. You see, if you can see on the screen there, it's red, part of it. Brock in G3, terrain is higher both the source and the target, and it has a rule reference, which is for the full game. So in this case, it's Alpha 6.2, but don't worry about that. So that just tells me that if the 436 cannot fire at the 666, and vice versa. It's reciprocal. Where do they shoot? Not where, but how does the where affect it? So units can fire at anybody up to its long range, which is double its printed range. I'll give you an example. The 667 here has its middle number is its range. Excuse me, so it can fire at anybody up to double that distance, 12 hexes. It's quite far. Let's put it way over here. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So if these guys had line of sight, which they do, and if you don't believe me, watch this. Yoink. Range is 12. So they can fire at each other. They both have range, or sorry, yeah, they both have, the printed range is 6. So they can fire up to their long range, which is double the printed value, up to double the printed value. They can fire up to normal range, which is exactly the printed value. In this case, I'll talk about the penalties for these types of fires later. So the 4.36 can fire, if the American were here, range of 3 hexes, that's normal range. Also, enemy units can be fired at what we call point blank fire. Point blank fire happens when units are in hexes next to each other. Remember, this is starter kit. There's no upper level buildings. We don't have to worry about sewers or any kind of weird different locations in the same hex. Starter kit. If you're in the hex next to a guy, you're at point blank range. Excuse me. And you have line of sight to each other. So what are the effects of these ranges? Well, long range fire. Oh, I missed. Yeah, I did talk about point blank. So we'll start with that point blank range, and then we'll work our way out. At point blank range, the firepower that a unit has is double its printed value. So in this case, the 4.36, if it were to fire at the American, would have a firepower value of 8. The American shooting back at the German would have a firepower of 12. So beyond point blank and up to normal printed range, your firepower is exactly what's printed on the counter. 3 hexes for the German in that case, firepower of 4. Up to 6 for the American would be firepower of 6, the exact printing. And beyond normal range and up to and including double its range is long range fire, and this firepower is halved. So, and you retain the halves until you get everything all together. So for example, if you have a first line American squad firing at long range, its firepower is 3. There's no 3 column on the infantry fire table. That's fine, but what if you have 2 units firing? Well, 3 plus 3 is 6. Anyway, you just add them up. Add up individual units before you come to the end. And the last thing I'll talk about is for the effective fire there is when you calculate the firepower. I'll actually do that at the end, how to calculate the firepower when you're going to make a fire attack. That'll be the final thing, because there's a lot more to it than just range. So when can units fire? Again, we're talking about ASL starter kit. Any unit can fire in its own prep fire phase. That means if this were the American turn, only the American units can fire. If they do fire, using the restrictions mentioned before, they have to be unbroken. They have to have enemy units in the line of sight, and up to and including its double or long range fire. And they can fire without any penalty to it. So the prep fire is basically a normal rate of fire. During the movement phase, now we assume it's the American turn, and as expended in a previous video, when you move into a hex, you tell how many movement factors you expend. In this case, that elite unit has moved, and the American player announces, I expend 1 movement factor, which just says 1. At this point, the German has an opportunity to make what's called first fire. I'm not going to get into how first fire works and subsequent first fire and final protective fire and all that. That'll come later. But right now, just to know that during player A's movement phase, as player A expends movement factors, player B can fire as they move. You cannot bring them back. For example, if as unit, this unit moved here for 1, goes in here for a total of 3. At this point, the conscript cannot say, well, I want to shoot at you when you're in L5. I'm going to move you back. No, you can't do that. Those of you that play the original squad leader, that's exactly what you do. But it's, again, we want to get away from that. So you fire in the prep fire in the movement phase. The next phase that comes up is the defensive fire phase. In the defensive fire phase, the defender can fire any of his units at any enemy unit that it has in line of sight, provided that unit is not marked with final fire. If the unit is marked with final fire, like this, see that unit's marked final fire, it cannot shoot. If there is a unit marked with first fire, it cannot shoot unless there's somebody adjacent. For example, here. They can then fire at them, and we'll talk about the penalties that come with that later. This unit here, let's assume that the unit far away did not expend any movement factors, that's fine. This unit here with the leader, the leader got to the bottom, can fire through this enemy unit and at them. There's no restriction on firing at the closest target during the defensive fire phase, if you're eligible to shoot. And the final phase during which somebody can actually fire is the advancing fire phase. That is for the moving player. There's a number of restrictions, but basically you fire at half your firepower for moving. At the end, later I will talk about some special fires, but just basically you can, the moving player can move his or her units, can fire at this time, whether they moved or not. Of course, if a unit is marked with prep fire, like this, then that unit cannot fire in the advancing fire phase, but those that aren't can be marked with advanced fire like that. Why would you fire? Well, why not? Basically, you want to shoot the enemy when the enemy is vulnerable, and basically that's the who, what, where, when, and why you would fire. Now let's talk about how you actually do it, and I'll talk about it through phases. And as I do that, I will take this thing and I'll put it there so you can see what phase I'm talking about. Try to get a little bit closer in here. I'll get rid of all the fire markers and we'll talk about how you do it. I'll assume that it is the German, wrong, I'll assume that it's the American fire phase. It's the American player's turn. Excuse me, it's the American player's turn. So as we get into the prep fire phase, excuse me, the American decides to prep fire with one unit because, well, why not? He takes the elite unit and he's going to fire on to the defender there, the conscript. He wants to shoot the conscript. First thing you do is you determine what firepower that's going to be. In this case, we see that the targets are 4 hexes away. The target is 4 hexes away from the American. American range is 6, so it's going to use his normal firepower of 6. Excuse me. Put that down there. Like, so we know it's firepower of 6. Next, what we'll have to do is determine if there are any modifications to the firepower, any dice roll modifiers or DRMs. And remembering from a previous video, the terrain will offer up some dice roll modifiers. For example, orchards. We can see here that this is going to pass through some orchards. They offer hindrance, and building, or they can also offer terrain, can also offer protection. We see that the conscript here is in a stone building. If you recall, the dice roll modifier for being in a stone building is +3. So we have to determine the line of sight to see if there's any, what do you want to call it, hindrances along the way. And we can see that there are 2. Remembering that orchards are inherent, so if it touches any part of the hex, including the hex sides, it will block it. And even if you draw the line of sight here, it'll tell you on Vassal that there are 2 hindrances. So hindrance here of +1, hindrance here of +2, and then +3 for terrain modifier. There are no other modifiers, so it's going to be firepower of 6, and the dice roll modifiers are +5. It's not a very good attack. Here's the 6 column. I'll roll 2 dice, IFT. I get us 8. 8 plus 6 is a lot. Takes it off the chart. Excuse me. Yeah, 14 doesn't even register until you get up around 30 or 36 firepowers. So the fire, excuse me, was ineffective. But we just showed you how to apply the firepower and the dice roll modifiers. Next, we'll go to the movement phase. The American fired, and at this point, it was ineffective. But now this first line squad is going to move. And it's going to try to get into a position where it can attack the conscript. So moves here for movement of 1. And the American player says 1. At this point, the German says, you know what, I think I see them, and I'm going to fire at them as they move. So the 8 -1 here, with the 4, 6, 7 says, I will fire, and it will be marked, as I said, with first fire. So, first thing, what is the firepower? Look at the range is 4. Here's a firepower of 4, range of 6. It's normal firepower, so therefore the firepower is 4. What kind of dice roll modifiers do we have here? Well, for terrain, the American unit is moving in the open ground, so there's no protection. It is moving in the first fire phase. Now, if there's no hindrance between the two, then the first a modifier of -1 for first fire moving in the open would apply. However, the fire, as we can see here, actually goes through hindrance. Therefore, first fire moving in the open does not apply. For you old squad leader players, we know that this is different, but in ASL and starter kit, the target unit is not considered to be an open ground for that modifier if there's any type of hindrance between it. It could be smoke, it could be orchards, it could be grain, and I think that's about it for starter kit. So there we know that that does not apply. However, the squad is using non-assault movement. So first fire non-assault movement is a modifier of -1. Also, if you look at the leader, he has an 8-1. We know that's a -1 leader, as we call it. So that means that since he is directing that fire, there is a -1 modifier to that fire. Total dice roll modifier is -2. Firepower is 4, dice roll modifier -2. We have the IFT is ready. I roll the 2 dice, I roll a 9. It's not a very good attack. However, 9 minus 2 is 7. 7 on the 4 column, if you look here, my mouse should show it, it says PTC, pin task check. Rolls a 6, he's fine. Also at this point you'll note that we'll have to leave some residual firepower in there. We'll talk about that in greater terms later. It was firepower 4, so basically half the firepower goes in for firepower of 2. There was a hindrance of 1, and for every hindrance you drop a column, so therefore instead of 2 firepower residual, it's a firepower of 1. So if somebody else moves in that hex, they'll be attacked by 1 firepower for free. And they are marked first fire. The squad continues to move and decides to go here. They're point blank to the conscript and the others. So what's going to happen is, as they expend for the 2 more movement factors, total of 3 that they've used, the Germans decide they're going to fire. They're going to fire with the conscript, and they're going to fire with the guys next door. And then finally these guys here, they can also fire if they have line of sight. They don't know if they do, but they're going to declare it. They're going to do what's called subsequent first fire, and they're marked as such. If he's firing at subsequent first fire, you're basically fired at half firepower. There's other restrictions, I guess, and one of those restrictions, I'll get rid of this, is that there cannot be any enemy units closer. That enemy unit is 3 hexes away. The other enemy units, it doesn't matter if, as long as they're in line of sight, it's fine. If there was an enemy unit that was 1 hex or 2 hexes away but blocked by line of sight, it wouldn't apply. So it has to be the closest enemy that I can see. In this case, it can. So we'll confirm line of sight for all 3. He can see, and we note that there is a hindrance. I5 shoots in, and I also note that there's a hindrance. And I4, of course, can see. So they all have line of sight. Now let's calculate what the firepower would be. Subsequent first fire is halved. Well, correction, is a normal range with a firepower of 4. However, its subsequent first firepower, it's halved, so it's a firepower of 2. Next, the 4.67 as normal range is firing first time it's firing, so it's basically a firepower of 4. We're at total firepower so far of 6. Finally, the conscript is in there as well, and the conscript's normal firepower is 4. However, this is point blank fire, as pointed out before, therefore it doubles to 8. 8 plus 6 is 14. So we have a firepower of 14, and we consult the chart, and it goes from 12 and then to 16. There is no 14, but they're going to fire anyway. All right, so we know it's a firepower of, on the 12 column. What modifiers apply? He's in a stone building, so we know that's a +3. So far we're at +3. Notice that some, but not all of the units have a hindrance that block them. If only some of a fire group, in this case a multi-hex fire group, is firing, if one of them has a hindrance, then it applies to the entire firepower attack. There is a hindrance of +1, so that's another one. So we're at net net dice roll modifier of +4. You may ask if the leader can actually contribute to this, and the answer is no. For a leader to contribute to the firepower, it has to be located with every unit that's firing. If I had 3 -1 leaders, one in each hex, then yes, I could, because they're grouping their fire together. I only have it in one hex. That leader is not able to direct the fire of a unit in the next hex over, so therefore the leader modifier does not apply. So we have a dice roll modifier of +4 so far. That squad was using non-assault movement, so there's a first fire non-assault movement -1. So the net dice roll modifier is 3. Firepower 12. Dice roll modifier +3, and I rolled a 3. How about that? I was hoping to get doubles, but it didn't matter. I'll talk about that next. So I consult the chart and I see that there is a 2 morale check. I'll roll the morale check first. Basically roll 2 dice and add 2. I rolled 6. 6 plus 2 is 8. 8 is more than its morale, so it does break. Talked about residual firepower is basically half the firepower going in, so it should be 6. I'll pull the 6 down. However, there was a hindrance of 1, so therefore it will actually decrease by 1 value, so 1 column. So it's now actually only a 4 firepower if somebody were to break in there. So that's pretty much it in terms of that. Now it talks about some weird cases here for firepower, and that's basically how it's applied. Get rid of the residual. I'm not done yet. What am I talking about? Residual is done because now we're in the defensive fire phase. This unit is marked with final fire. It cannot fire. This unit is marked with first fire. However, there's no enemy units adjacent to it, so it cannot fire. Mark it final fire. The conscript, however, does have an enemy unit at point blank range and decides to fire again. All the modifiers to its firepower will be calculated first. Its normal firepower is 4. It's point blank fire, so it doubles to 8. He's already fired. He's marked with first fire, so it's halved from 8 to 4. So it's a firepower of 4. Dice roll modifiers that apply. The only one that applies right now, because that unit is not moving anymore, is +3 for the terrain. So it's a firepower of 4, dice roll modifier +3, and the conscript rolls. Conscript rolls a 9. 9 plus 3 is 12. That's nowhere near on the 4 column. You don't even have to look. At this point, that unit is marked with final fire. And for the sake of argument, I'll assume that there's another unit right here. And if you'll notice, his firepower is underscored. If I can zoom in a little bit, and you can see a little bit better if my screen decides to respond. There you go. So 6, 6, 7, the first 6 is underscored. That means it has assault fire. And I'll just calculate this one because very quickly, this only applies in the advanced fire phase and only if the unit is eligible for assault fire. He's going to fire at the unit that's 2 hexes away. So calculate by range. It's within normal range but not point blank, so it's a firepower of 6. It's the advanced fire phase, so it's halved to 3. He has assault fire. What you do at this point is you add 1 to that firepower and then round up if necessary. In this case, it rounds up to 4. Not bad. So 4, we got the firepower. It's going to be firing at this guy here. He's in a stone building. We know the terrain effects modifier +3. So it's a firepower 4, dice roll modifier +3. He shoots, rolls an 8, +3 is 11. That's no effect. But you can see how the effect is. And while I've got that, I'll show you how sometimes you end up with a weird situation. In this case, what I've just pulled down is a German, what's usually represented for a parachute squad. Firepower 4, range of 4, morale of 8. The firepower 5 is underscored. The range is as well. That does not apply in starter kit, so ignore that. Firepower of 5. Assume it is the German assault, a German advancing fire phase. So we'll just, for sake of argument, just to show you how it works. So the firepower is 5. He's going to fire at the 6.67. So it's normal range, not point blank. So firepower is 5. Because it's advancing fire phase, we'll cut that in half. Goes down to 2.5. Retain the fraction. Add 1. So we're at 3.5. And what you do now, and you do this for assault fire probably only, is you round up. So even though that squad has moved, and even though its firepower ought to be 2, it actually rounds up to 4. So it would be a 4 plus 3, and roll the 9, 10, 12. There's no effect. Anyway, that's just to show. Retain the fractions all the way through, and if you have several units, do each unit individually. Or apply the modifiers to double for point blank, half for advancing fire, whatever. But when it comes to assault fire, do that last. Add 1, then round up. Add 1, and then round up. So those are the 3 phases. Now we'll talk about some crazy things that happen during when you fire. One thing to note is, as I've already said, the dice roll modifiers are cumulative. So if you have leaders that help you or terrain that hinders your shooting, they all modify and they all apply to each other. The one special thing I'm going to talk about is cowering. And what cowering is, where do I get rid of it? There, prep fire, defensive fire done, moves are done. Moves for some reason aren't showing. I'm just going to move this guy out of the way. So here's a special case, and I'll just bring these guys up. And I'll get rid of all these others. There we go. I talked about inexperienced units. Conscript and green units are inexperienced. However, green units, when they are stacked with a leader, are not considered inexperienced. So remember that. It's right in the rules. It's in the definitions, actually, at the beginning of the ASL starter kit. In ASL starter kit number 1, it is on page 3, and I'll read it. Inexperienced. Green MMC not stacked with a good order leader, and conscript MMC suffer inexperienced penalties. They get 3 movement factors. The breakdown or X number is lowered by 1. They cower 2 columns, and they get a +1 on their ambush roll. So as it is laid out right now, these 2 units are inexperienced. This unit is not. And where's the Americans? There we go. And that unit is not. I'm going to move everybody over so that they're all in the open. They all can shoot at each other. It doesn't matter their types, but I'm going to talk about cowering. What is cowering? If in a firepower attack you roll doubles, and if the fire attack is not led by a leader, then the guys firing have basically come under a little bit of panic because they're shooting at enemies, so the firepower actually drops by a column. So if you're firing on a firepower of 8, it'll drop to a column of 6. Firing power of 1, it goes off the chart and it won't even count as fire. If you're firing first fire, you're marked with final fire, and all sorts of bad things could happen when you get into some of the special rules. So, as it stands right now, these 2 units decide to fire at the conscript there. For some reason, let's go like this to make it logical. He's point blank. He is not. So he has a firepower of 6. He's a firepower of 2. So it's net firepower of 8. There's no modifiers. And I roll, the dice gods gave it to me. I rolled a 4. It will cower. I mentioned to you that it'll shift 1 column. If there's an inexperienced unit involved in the fire, then it will shift 2 columns to the left. Pull up the IFT. So instead of a firepower of 8, it shifts over to the 4 column. So if you look at a 4 on the 8 column, that should be a 2 morale check. When it comes all the way to the 4 column, it's only a 1 morale check, if it were the case. Now, same firepower, the leader is there stacked with the green unit, even though the leader is not directing the fire of that conscript of the green unit, it doesn't suffer the effects of being inexperienced. So in that case, it would only shift one column. Conversely, any of these guys shooting back the green unit, or sorry, the conscript, even if it's loaded or located with, where is it? Superman counter. Oh yeah, even a 7-0. 7-0 leader. If the leader is not directing the fire, it will shift one column to the left. So in this case, maybe what they want to do is just fire them alone. Rule, get doubles or not, it doesn't matter. However, if the fire attack involves, if not every element is being directed by a leader, then a possibility of cowering exists, whether a leader is with a conscript or not. With a green unit, it's different. All right, I'm not going to get into anything more, but I've just basically covered off here for ASL Starter Kit 1, we talked about fire attacks. Who can do them? Unbroken and pinned units only. What do? They fire at enemy units that are in their line of sight. Point to note, if you're not sure they're in the line of sight, you cannot check until you declare the attack. And if they're not in the line of sight, you roll the dice anyway. You could break a weapon, or basically the unit has shot already, but there's just no effect on the table. You can shoot at range up to double range, which is long range, up to its printed value, which is normal range, and special at adjacent, you're firing at point blank, which doubles the firepower. The modifications to the firepower are cumulative as well. So if you're firing adjacent, it doubles, and if it's the advancing fire phase, it'll halve. So if doubles and halves, it'll be normal. Assault fire is different, of course. When you can shoot, the moving player or the phasing player can fire in his prep fire phase and also in his advancing fire phase. We know the restrictions. If you fire in the prep fire phase, you cannot move. Movement. In the movement phase, the defender can declare first fire on units that expend movement factors in its line of sight. We talked a little bit about subsequent first fire as well. Defensive fire phase, the defender can fire at any enemy units within its line of sight as long as it's not marked with final fire. And if it's marked with first fire, then it can shoot at enemy units that are adjacent. And finally, in the advancing fire phase, the attacker or the person who is phasing the turn, who is moving, can fire anybody eligible player who is not marked with prep fire. And as already stated, it can't be broken. It can be pinned, however. We also noted why you want to shoot, because that's the whole aim of the game. We talked about how you go through the process. You first figure out the firepower, you figure out the dice roll modifiers, you roll the dice and you apply the results. And remember that the dice roll modifiers, just like the firepower effects, are cumulative. And we talked a little bit special about the cowering. So thank you for watching. The cowering, again, if you roll doubles and if it's not leader directed, it's dropping off. And remember that difference between green and conscript units. Conscript units are always inexperienced and they always suffer those. If a green unit is in the same location, or the same hex I should say, as a leader, it is not considered inexperienced anymore. So that's the difference between green and conscript. And with that, I will say thank you for watching. Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. And yeah, it's Sunday. Have yourself a great day, and I'll talk to you later.